In this video, I'm going to go over the important points that you will need to know to crochet this Shamrock Doily. You can see that the border is made up of these small shamrock motifs with little chain spacers in between. If you crocheted these in the traditional way, you would have to cut the yarn between each little motif, and you would end up with dozens of annoying yarn tails to weave in. But I'm going to show you a better way. With my breakaway crochet techniques, you will be able to crochet these little shamrocks one after the other with one length of yarn. The secret for doing this is knowing how to make floating rings. So if you don't know how to make floating rings, then please watch the introductory video. You'll find the link for that in the description. I've also provided a link to download the free written version of this pattern from Ravelry, which you will need to have because I'm not going over the entire pattern in this video. The first part of this pattern involves making a traditional solid granny square. I've done 6 rounds in this particular pattern. You can make it bigger, and I've given instructions for how to do that in the written pattern. But for now, even though there are a few different ways of making a solid granny square, I'm asking you to do it as in the instructions because that sets us up well to make a transition between here and the border. And just something I want to demonstrate before I go on. If this was not the last round, I would end it with a chain 1 and a single crochet in the next stitch, because that aligns the hook kind of right in that corner, because that's where we start just 1/2 of the corner stitches for the next round. Okay, so I would do those 2 there and go on. But since this is the last round, I can end that with just the normal chain 2 and a normal slip stitch into the next stitch. So the important thing here is my hook is situated over the first double crochet of that round, which is just where I want to be to start the border. So you'll notice on the finished piece, the border actually starts with these kind of half shamrocks that are kind of a transition between the square and the border. So that sets us up for the following rounds. So that's what we're going to do first. So to start the transition round, count over 1, 2, 3 double crochets and find that chain just above that 3rd double crochet. That's where we're going to put our first double crochet. So 1, 2, 3, and in that stitch there. And I'm going to do a whole bunch of other stitches all in that same stitch to finish that half shamrock. So we continue with the chain 3, slip stitch, chain 3, 2 double crochets again in that same stitch, chain 3, again a slip stitch in that same stitch, chain 3 again, double crochet in that same stitch, and now count over 2 and slip stitch into that 3rd stitch, and that gives us kind of a half of a shamrock. We continue with chain 4, which kind of gives us that little spacer that we have between the little motifs. All right, chain 2, slip stitch in that next stitch, and that sets us up with our pattern. Just continue in that same way by skipping 2 stitches, going into the 3rd one, and repeating just like we did at the beginning. Now I'm just getting ready to finish this first side, and after I've done that very last half shamrock, I put the last slip stitch into the space, and then I make a little chain 4 space by just chaining 4 and slip stitching back in that corner again. So don't forget to do that. And now we're ready to start the next side just the same way, again counting over 3 stitches and working that first double crochet in the 3rd stitch. And I've just finished all 4 sides except for just that very end. I've done that half shamrock and finished this side with a slip stitch into the corner space, a chain, and a double crochet into that same space. What that does is that creates a kind of a chain 4 space there like we were doing before, but leaves the hook in the right position. That sets us up for the next row. So the next row is where we start with making our little motifs using the breakaway techniques. And just to get our bearings, this is where we've left off, and we're going to start working just these sort of half motifs here. So we're only going to go halfway around, do our little chains, halfway around again, chain, to make that row of motifs. And we're doing that all the way around. But the really crucial thing to remember is we're going to be working this way around the square. So when I say where the next tip of the shamrock is, that means you look this way, or the next chain 4 space, we're going in this direction. So just to give you an idea of how to make those little half shamrocks, we start with a floating double crochet. Now to do a floating double crochet, start with yarn over and then make a floating ring. A floating ring means we go yarn over again, pinch that yarn just under the hook, yarn over again, pinch it together with that previous loop, yarn over and pull through the 2 pinched loops. So there is those 2 little strands there make the floating ring, and that replaces the usual chain 4 that we would normally have in making little motifs such as this. So from now on, all the little stitches are going to go in that floating ring, into that loop. Now we're almost finished, because since this is a floating double crochet, we've got to finish the actual double crochet part. So to do that, just yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and that whole operation there is our floating double crochet, and that's how you will start every shamrock from now on. Now to continue, chain 3 and slip stitch, find our little floating ring, go in there. We're going to slip stitch into the floating ring, chain 3, and for now we're just doing one more double crochet in this little shamrock. So that's as far as we're going to go on that particular one, because now it's time to move on to our little spacer. So to do that, chain 2, and to connect this row to the previous one, slip stitch into the top of the next shamrock. And by that I mean, you know, the highest point. And I'm going into that second stitch there that seems to look the best to do all the slip stitches in that point. And again, I'm doing my breakaway slip stitch, chain 2, and start the next shamrock in the same way, the floating double crochet, chain 3, slip stitch through those 2 little loops, chain 3, double crochet, and now we've got to join this one into the next chain 4 space. So again, we go through there, pull everything to the left, do a slip stitch, and we continue with the other half of this shamrock. Let me just sort that out. So we've gone a quarter of the way around. Let's go another quarter of the way around with another double crochet, chain 3, slip stitch into the floating ring, chain 3, and end with a double crochet, which gives us halfway around. Okay, so that's the gist of it. Let's continue on that side, and just remember when you get to the corner, instead of going into one of these chain 4 loops, we're going to do our joining in that corner there. So just to be clear, I've gotten to the corner. I've worked a quarter of the way around that little shamrock. So I join it in that chain 4 space and carry on just like the other ones. So I complete this side with a chain 2, and I'm ready to turn the corner and work another side, and again going all the way around until I get all those little half crochet or half shamrocks done. And again, the first one of this row again joins into the corner. It's kind of like just doing anything, you do things twice in the corner. So it's going to look like this corner here. These 2 go into, remember we've got that little chain 4 space there. So the last one and the first one of a row go into that same chain 4 space. So now I'm at the end of row 2. That's where I finished up with that last shamrock in the corner, little space there like we made at the beginning. And I should have 1, 2, 3, 4 half shamrocks on each side. So that's a way of checking to make sure you've got everything in the right place. And things look a little bit hard to see because those half shamrocks are kind of a little bit distorted for now. But that's how things should pretty much look after row 2. Now to continue with row 3, we don't worry about any gaps between these 2 here. There's going to be a gap from now on until the very end, so don't let that worry you. Instead, we're going to turn around and come back around this way and finish off all of those half shamrocks we've just started in the previous row. And that's really pretty traditional, just starting with a double crochet and chain 3. Again, all these stitches go into the same floating ring, chain 3, 2 double crochet this time, so we're not connecting to anything, chain 3, slip stitch, chain 3, and we're ready to finish off that first leaf with another double crochet. So just remember, all our shamrocks are lucky. They have 4 leaves. And to close up that final leaf there, at the moment it looks like 5, but we're going to close that up by doing a slip stitch into this next chain 2 space, kind of close to the leaf we were just working on. So that closes up that little 4-leaf clover there. Continue with chain 4, and let's move on to this next shamrock, but first we need to slip stitch in that next chain 2 space close to the next leaf and finish off this next shamrock in the exact same way. So here's how things should look after all 4 sides have been done. And again, there's a gap between these 2 here, mainly because this one's not finished yet, and we connect that up later on, so don't worry about there being a gap between those 2. Okay, so the next row really is pretty much the same as row 2, where we did all these half shamrocks. And again, we're going clockwise around to set up that row. But there is one difference at the end of this row, in that the last little shamrock doesn't really have anything to join into. So you work halfway around without it joined up. So that looks perfectly all right if it looks like that. And the other thing to do is I'd like you to make a chain 6 loop, which will help us later on when we join things up. So once you're halfway around, just do the chain 6 and slip stitch back into that top of that leaf, and carry on with the rest of the shamrock, which begins row 5. Again, row 5 is pretty much the same as row 3, where you just finish off the other half of each shamrock. But when it comes time to do the sort of the spacer in between, and we finish off that shamrock with a slip stitch around the chain 2 there. But on this final row, instead of doing chain 4 to make that space, just do chain 2. That's very important. Otherwise, the edge becomes a little bit too wavy. So we need to make that little triangle to kind of close it up. We're not making it into a diamond. So just make sure you remember to do that on the last row. So now at the end of row 5, we've completed all the shamrocks except for these kind of first 2 on this edge. And so now it comes time to join everything up. Okay, so I'll just show you, it's a little bit tricky. So I'll try to explain that as best I can. I'll show you the already finished doily. Here is the shamrock that has that chain 6 loop in it, just there. And here's the shamrock, that's that one there where we've come to that point there. So the next thing to do is to slip stitch into the chain 6 loop there, finish that leaf, finish off this next leaf, and then slip stitch into this chain 2 space here, which finishes off that shamrock. And now what we need to do is to kind of imitate this chain 4 spacer and join up the little shamrocks at the same time. Okay, so we've done a slip stitch in there. The next thing to do would be to do a chain, slip stitch into this shamrock, chain one, slip stitch into this one, and both of these leaves will be unjoined, so they'll be easy to see. Then another chain one, and then a slip stitch back into that space where we started. Then we finish off this shamrock, and then the very end we slip stitch into that final chain 4 space there at the beginning. To do that, it might be easier to kind of spin things around so that you've got the chain 6 loop kind of underneath where we are, and that kind of gets things sort of lined up, and it'll keep things in order as we go along. Okay, so again, the first thing to do is to slip stitch into the chain 6 loop, and again I'm going in this way and out and do a slip stitch. Then we come back to this unfinished one, finish this leaf with another double crochet in the chain 3, slip stitch into the center ring, start on the next leaf with the chain 3 and double crochet. And again, we've got to finish off this leaf by finding that next chain 2 space. It'll be easy to see on this because it's just right there. Okay, so that's finished that edge shamrock. Now we've got to do the little chain 4 equivalent. So continue by doing a chain 1. Just come underneath, and there is the next unjoined leaf. So to find that, you just follow along, and there it is. So that's how we know how to find that next join. So slip stitch in there, chain 1. Let's find the next unjoined leaf. Again, we just follow along until we get to it, slip stitch in there, another chain, and another slip stitch into that original chain 2 space. We know it's the right one because it's leading to another unfinished leaf, so then we slip stitch into that one there. Which leaves us with our last unfinished shamrock. So finish that off with our double crochet, chain 3, slip stitch, chain 3, double crochet, and find that very first chain 4 space there and slip stitch into it. And that finishes off that edge, hopefully. I know that's a little bit tricky, and if you just try to keep your head around that it's meant to look like all the rest of the corners, then I hope you'll be all right. If that's still too complicated, let me know. I'll try to think of another way to explain it. And if you join my group on Facebook, which is the Breakaway Crochet Support and Chat group, you can ask a question there, and hopefully we can answer it for you. All right, so thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this project. Please share your final projects, and I hope to see you again soon.